The View's Hot Topics table had seen genuine celebrity clashes before, but nothing quite prepared the studio for what was about to unfold. Meghan Markle sat in the guest chair, polished and ready for what she assumed would be a sympathetic conversation about her various projects. Angelina Jolie sat as the other guest, there ostensibly to discuss her recent humanitarian work in Gaza and her upcoming European relocation. Then Angelina asked a question about Archwell's actual, measurable impact. Just a simple question, delivered with the quiet directness of someone who'd spent over 2 decades doing genuinely dangerous humanitarian work in actual conflict zones. What Meghan said in response revealed something the cameras couldn't miss. What Angelina said after that, calm, measured, devastatingly precise, would become the single most replayed daytime television moment of the year, because Angelina Jolie had walked through refugee camps in Sudan, inspected aid crossings into Gaza, sat with survivors of unimaginable violence across nearly 50 countries. This is the confrontation nobody saw coming. Subscribe now, hit that notification bell, and let's see what happened. The View studio had its usual Wednesday energy. The famous table, the live audience, 2 prominent guests scheduled for what producers expected would be a substantive, if occasionally spirited, conversation. Angelina was promoting her recent humanitarian trip to the Egypt-Gaza border. Meghan was there discussing her various current projects. Angelina arrived first, settling into her chair with the quiet composure of someone who'd faced considerably more intimidating rooms than a daytime talk show. Meghan arrived shortly after, her usual entourage in tow, greeting everyone with practiced warmth. "Angelina, wonderful to see you." "Meghan." Angelina's tone was polite but measured. "I've been following your various ventures." The segment began normally enough, Whoopi guiding conversation through current events, Angelina discussing her recent Gaza border visit, some standard banter about balancing public work with family life. Then things shifted. "Angelina's just returned from actually visiting the Rafah crossing," Whoopi said. "Walking through warehouses full of medical supplies denied entry into Gaza. Meghan, you've talked about your own humanitarian priorities. Want to share how your approach compares?" Meghan smiled confidently. "Archwell focuses on creating systemic, sustainable change through strategic partnerships." Angelina considered this. "That's interesting phrasing. What specifically has that produced?" "I ask because when I'm evaluating humanitarian claims, I look for concrete outcomes. Specific people helped, specific conditions changed. Our impact operates on a longer timeline. I've been doing this work for over 20 years, since Cambodia in 2001. I understand longer timelines, but even initial phases usually produce something measurable. What's yours?" Sarah tried to interject. "I think what Meghan means is—" "I'd actually like to hear Meghan explain it herself," Angelina said gently but firmly. "What has Archwell specifically accomplished?" "We've funded numerous initiatives across mental health, gender equity, and community development." "Funded them how, specifically? What organizations? What amounts? What verified outcomes?" "I ask because I've personally overseen specific fund allocations to specific hospitals, specific schools, specific programs. I can name them. Can you name yours?" Silence stretched at the table. "We've built meaningful partnerships across multiple sectors," Meghan said, her composure holding but strained. "Partnerships that produced what, though?" "I've walked through actual refugee camps. I've seen actual medical facilities I helped fund. I've met specific families whose situations changed because of specific interventions. Can you point me to anything comparable?" "Our approach differs from traditional humanitarian frameworks." "Different how?" "Because from where I sit, different sometimes means avoiding the accountability that traditional frameworks require. What makes your approach effective if it can't produce comparable evidence?" Meghan's expression tightened. "You're comparing situations that aren't equivalent. I'm asking for basic transparency about outcomes. That's not an unfair comparison. That's the standard any legitimate humanitarian work should meet. Perhaps you're used to a different scale of resources than what we've had access to. I started with far less than what you currently have access to, actually. I funded my first refugee projects from acting paychecks before I had any institutional support at all. Resources aren't the excuse here. Specificity is what's missing. Let's talk about your recent business ventures, Angelina continued, her tone still measured. The reports about Netflix, about Spotify, about the various product lines. From outside, it looks like a pattern of commercial ventures rather than humanitarian focus. Is that fair? Every venture serves our broader mission. Does it, though? Because a struggling lifestyle show and a jam brand don't obviously connect to systemic humanitarian change. Help me understand the connection. You're oversimplifying complex strategic decisions. I'm asking you to explain the complexity, since it's not self-evident. I've spent decades explaining exactly how specific interventions connect to specific outcomes. That transparency is what legitimacy requires. Joy tried to lighten things. Maybe we could discuss something a bit less. I think this is actually important, Angelina said calmly. Public humanitarian claims deserve scrutiny, regardless of who's making them. You've certainly had your own business ventures alongside humanitarian work, Meghan said, an edge entering her voice. Fashion lines, fragrance deals. That's not so different from what I'm doing. The difference is, I've never claimed those ventures were humanitarian work themselves. I keep the categories separate and honest. You're presenting jam and a lifestyle show as part of systemic change. Those are different claims entirely. There's been reporting about you seeking guidance from Kris Jenner, Angelina continued, her curiosity genuine rather than hostile. That seems like an interesting choice given your stated humanitarian priorities. What's the actual thinking there? Meghan's composure flickered. I value diverse business perspectives. Kris Jenner's entire model is maximizing exposure and monetization. That's rather different from humanitarian discretion. Are you genuinely pursuing both simultaneously, or has one taken priority? That's a reductive characterization of a business relationship. Then help me understand the actual nature of it. Because from outside, it looks like you're learning exposure strategies from someone whose brand is built on the opposite of humanitarian restraint. Not every relationship needs to fit your particular framework for how humanitarian work should look. I'm not imposing a framework. I'm asking about consistency. You've built public identity around protecting privacy, around meaningful humanitarian purpose. Seeking guidance specifically from someone whose philosophy is maximum exposure seems worth explaining, not dismissing. Your father, Angelina said, her tone softening slightly but the point remaining. Given everything about family and reconciliation, has he come up in your own reflection at all? Meghan's expression closed. My family relationships are private. I understand privacy. But I've also learned that genuine humanitarian instinct usually extends to your own family first. If there's estrangement with your own father while you're building a public identity around compassion, that's worth examining honestly. You're making assumptions about things you don't understand. I'm asking you to explain them, since the public narrative and the private reality seem to contain some tension. Every family has complexities outsiders can't fully grasp. I've navigated plenty of complicated family situations myself, publicly, under scrutiny. I'm not asking from a position of judgment. I'm asking because the gap between your public compassion narrative and your own family situation seems worth acknowledging honestly, rather than deflecting. The divorce rumors, Angelina continued, direct but not unkind. They're persistent. What's your actual response? Tabloid speculation without foundation. Speculation requiring formal denial, though. In my experience, genuinely stable situations don't require that level of public correction. What's actually happening? Every public marriage faces scrutiny. Sure, but this seems like specific, sustained scrutiny rather than general attention. What's generating that specificity if there's no substance underneath? Meghan grabbed her water, visibly rattled. You're fishing for something that doesn't exist. I'm asking direct questions because that's what genuine accountability looks like. I've faced plenty of direct questions about my own life. They're uncomfortable, but they're fair. You've had your own share of public marriage difficulties. I have, and I've never denied them vigorously when they were real. When my marriage to Brad ended, I didn't spend months issuing statements insisting everything was fine. I let the process happen honestly. That's different from what you're describing. Let me ask about your children, Angelina said, shifting but maintaining her measured tone. There's this ugly corner of the internet with conspiracy theories about their parentage. How do you handle that? Meghan's anger surfaced immediately. Those theories are racist and disgusting. They are, completely. But I've found that transparency usually combats false narratives better than secrecy does. Have you considered whether the extreme privacy around your children might actually feed that speculation, rather than protecting against it? I protect my children from harassment. I understand protective instinct. I have 6 children myself, and protecting them has always been central to how I live. But protection and secrecy aren't identical. Visibility, appropriately managed, often kills conspiracy theories faster than mystery does. You're blaming me for other people's racism. I'm suggesting the strategy deserves genuine examination, not blame. Meghan's composure cracked further. You've built your entire public image around constant global travel and photo opportunities. That's not so different from what you're accusing me of. Angelina remained unruffled. The difference is documentation. Every trip I've taken has produced specific reports, specific outcomes, specific accountability to the organizations I've worked with. That's not photo opportunity. That's 20 years of building verifiable humanitarian credibility. Perhaps your approach simply photographs better. Perhaps. Or perhaps the difference is that mine produces evidence and yours produces talking points. I'm open to being wrong about that, but you'd need to show me something specific to change my assessment. I don't need to prove my humanitarian commitment to you specifically. You don't need to prove it to me. But you're on national television claiming systemic impact. That claim invites exactly this kind of question from anyone paying attention, not just me. This entire conversation has become an attack, Meghan said, turning toward the hosts. Whoopi, surely you can see this has crossed a line. Whoopi considered this carefully. I think Angelina's asking fair questions, honestly. Nobody's said anything false. Sarah, Sunny, you understand what's happening here. Sunny tried to find middle ground. I think there's room for different approaches to humanitarian work. There's room for different approaches, Angelina said. But there's not room for avoiding basic accountability about what those approaches have actually accomplished. Meghan's frustration was becoming visible. You're all ganging up on me. Nobody's ganging up, Whoopi said. We're just not disagreeing with fair questions, Anna added quietly. I think the questions have actually been quite reasonable. You've spent your career adopting children internationally as some kind of humanitarian statement, Meghan said, her composure finally breaking into something sharper. Maybe that's its own kind of performance. The table went silent. Angelina's response was calm, measured, and utterly devastating. My children are my family, not props for public image. Every one of them knows exactly why our family exists the way it does, and none of them have ever been used as talking points in an argument I'm having with someone else. I'd ask you to leave my children entirely out of whatever point you're trying to make. Joy interjected quickly. Meghan, that's really not fair. I think we should move past that entirely, Sunny added firmly. Meghan's face reddened. I didn't mean, I think you meant exactly what you said, Angelina replied, still composed. But I'm not going to let my children become collateral damage in a conversation about your own accountability. This conversation has become deeply personal, Meghan said, standing up. It became personal when you brought up my children, Angelina said quietly. Everything before that was about your own documented choices and public claims. Those aren't personal attacks. They're basic questions any journalist would ask. I came here expecting collegial conversation among women. Collegiality doesn't mean avoiding accountability. I've had direct conversations with heads of state, with UN officials, with people far more powerful than either of us. Direct questions aren't attacks. They're how genuine work gets examined honestly. I won't sit here and be treated this way, Meghan said, grabbing her purse. That's your choice, Angelina said. But walking away doesn't answer the actual questions about Archwell's concrete accomplishments, about the business ventures, about the pattern of claims without evidence. Those remain, regardless of whether you're here to address them. Meghan moved toward the exit. History will remember how unfairly I was treated today. History will remember someone who couldn't provide basic evidence for her own humanitarian claims when asked directly, Angelina said, her tone still calm. That's not unfair treatment. That's simply accountability you weren't prepared to meet. Meghan left. The studio fell into stunned silence. Whoopi finally spoke. Well, that was unexpected. Angelina remained composed. I didn't come here looking for confrontation. I came to discuss actual humanitarian work. But when someone brings my children into a conversation about their own accountability, that requires a direct response. Joy nodded slowly. You handled that with more grace than most people would have. 20 years of doing this work teaches you that grace and directness aren't opposites, Angelina said. You can be calm and still be completely clear about where the lines are. Sarah added, I think what struck me most was how consistently specific you were, and how consistently vague the responses stayed. That gap tells its own story, Angelina said. I didn't need to raise my voice or make it personal. The questions did the work themselves. Whoopi turned to the camera. I want to be clear about what just happened. Angelina asked legitimate questions about documented public claims. When those questions became uncomfortable, the response was to attack her children rather than answer them. That's revealing in itself. She paused. I've watched Angelina Jolie do this work for over 2 decades. Rafah, Kherson, countless refugee camps most of us will never see. That's not performance. That's documented, verifiable commitment. When someone with considerably less documented substance tries to claim equivalent credibility and then attacks a mother's children when pressed, that tells you something important. The footage aired that afternoon. ABC made no edits. The clips that spread captured the collision. What has Archwell specifically accomplished? That's not an unfair comparison. That's the standard any legitimate humanitarian work should meet. My children are my family, not props for public image. I'd ask you to leave my children entirely out of whatever point you're trying to make. History will remember someone who couldn't provide basic evidence for her own humanitarian claims. Meghan's team released a statement calling the confrontation an unprovoked and deeply personal attack from a fellow guest. Angelina addressed it briefly through a representative. Angelina answered every question about her own work honestly and with documented specifics. When her children were brought into the conversation without provocation, she responded with the same composure she's shown in refugee camps and conflict zones for 20 years. She stands by everything she said. For Angelina Jolie, the confrontation became another demonstration of what 2 decades of genuine humanitarian work had built. The ability to maintain composure and specificity, even when conversations turned unexpectedly personal. For Meghan Markle, it was uniquely damaging precisely because she'd initiated an attack that had nothing to do with the actual conversation, revealing far more about her own position than any direct question could have. Angelina asked for concrete accomplishments. Meghan offered abstractions. Angelina asked about documented patterns. Meghan deflected toward attack. Angelina maintained composure throughout. Meghan walked out entirely. That's the whole story. 20 years of walking through actual refugee camps and conflict zones. She asked for concrete evidence instead of talking points. What does that tell you about the difference between documented commitment and public performance. If you want more content that recognizes when substance meets its limits, subscribe. This is where genuine accountability lives. Turn on notifications, don't miss what matters. Drop a like. Share this with someone. More honesty, more clarity, more of what 2 decades of real humanitarian work teaches you about the difference between substance and narrative. Stay with us.